over and over, this was like another Pearl Harbor. Well, no, it's not. Pearl Harbor, you had a whole nation behind the Pearl Harbor event ready to follow up and go to war.
Right.
I mean, they were at war, right? It's a very different thing than an isolated terrorist event. So to try and take an isolated, even if it's a big terrorist event, it was an isolated event, and try and ramp that up into an excuse to go to war with Afghanistan, what the heck would they want to do that for? And you just sort of figured it had to do something with oil, and it actually took me some research before I found out about the whole business about the natural gas pipelines and all the rest. Mm-hmm. But it all sort of slowly came together. But my focus and the group that I was associating with, their focus was on how do you try and prevent a national hysteria that's going to justify us going to war. Well, sure enough, they went to war, right? Mm-hmm. But that was where my energy was initially. And it was only later, like I started off with this, it was only later that I went back and looked at the actual collapses and started getting curious about what actually happened there.
Sorry to keep jumping from topic to topic here, but if you don't mind, I had a question for you from one of the forum members on the Pumpitout forum. Mm-hmm. It was concerning your paper, Destruction of the World Trade Center, North Tower, and Fundamental Physics. Mm-hmm. Now, did you have a problem getting that published in scientific journals, or?
Yep. I sent it to, it was one of the Bentham journals, open journals, you know. Mm-hmm. I just was trying to find some place that would publish it, and that was one that was recommended by Stephen Jones, and I tried that. I can't remember which journal I submitted it to. It was one of the engineering journals. It wasn't the same one they did for the anathermite. Mm-hmm. But I tried that one, and I sent it in, and I never heard back from them. And so about 2 or 3 months later, I wrote to them and said, what's going on with this paper? And they just mailed it back to me. And it had not been peer-reviewed. It had just sat there. They were just sitting on it that whole time. If I hadn't inquired, it probably just would have been sitting there to this day. So it was like, whoa, that's sort of, you know, it was a setback to not be able to get a resolution on that. Then I submitted it to the American Association of Physics Teachers. They have 2 journals. One of them is the American Journal of Physics. And so I submitted it there. I got it back within 24 hours on that case. So at least I was glad that they did an immediate turnaround. I think I had actually addressed some of their questions and submitted it a second time, and they again got it back within 24 hours. So it was obviously done at the administrative level. Now, the American Journal of Physics was saying, well, we're a teaching journal, and this is not about teaching. I've had people say, well, I should rewrite it with more of a teaching focus and so forth. So anyway, for whatever reason, I was turned down twice like that. And I finally decided I don't really care about playing that game. We've had a number of papers that the Truth Movement has come out with that have been published in the mainstream journals. And mm-hmm. I just wanted to get it out. It had been sitting around for so long unpublished. So I just said, let's just submit it to the Journal of 9/11 Studies. It still went through peer review. Mm-hmm. And it went around a couple of rounds of peer review, and then it got published.
So it's not like you submitted your paper to any peer-reviewed scientific journal and they debunked it or anything. It's just they didn't even bother to look at it.
They never reviewed it. It was just done at an administrative level without peer review. Mm-hmm. Twice.
Well, that's pretty strange. You would think at least they would,
Well, it's strange if you thought of it in normal terms, but the fact that it's a hot potato,
well,
basically what it's telling you is they were treating it like it's a hot potato. Well, look what happened to the journal that the nanothermite paper got published in. The editor resigned and all kinds of upheaval occurred as a result of them going forward because there are people who don't want this kind of thing out there, and so there are going to be repercussions. There's a lot of politics involved in these kinds of organizations. So
sometimes people just don't want to rock the boat.
Right. I mean, a lot of people don't want to rock the boat.
Yeah. It's just easier to go with the flow sometimes, I guess. Well, they had also wanted to know about when you tried to get your university interested in replicating the experiments with the red-gray chips.
I had a conversation with this guy. That's how come he even knows about it. But I just had a bright idea that, I went to Harvey Mudd College, which is a very good science and math school in Claremont, California. And I had been talking about all of this, showed my paper and various things like that, with Gray Bell, who is one of the emeritus professors there, who since that point has died, by the way. But at the time, he was interested and he was talking to people. So I was going through essentially a back door. It wasn't I wasn't actively dealing directly with the college or anything like that. But I just brought the idea up to him, and he just he didn't see how it was going to work out. As they have a whole thing called the engineering clinic, and they have various student projects and so forth. But he was saying how usually that's done in association with companies that fund the research and all the rest. And so it's a way of giving experience to the students and getting usable results back and so forth. So for just having a socially conscious project with no funding, it would be a different route. And he just saw problems involved in trying to do that. So I never really pursued that. The other thing is I didn't really have, I was under the wrong impression in terms of how much of the dust is really out there available for passing around. And
right, yeah.
Apparently it's a scarce resource. So,
well, he had also mentioned something about, I think we already touched on this, though. He asked, has anyone tested these red-gray chips besides Mark Bazell and F.H. Kunier?
Yeah,
and
I'm not directly involved with any of that, so
okay.
You might want to either talk to Kevin Rowan.
Right. And then also something about Stephen Jones and if you knew if his dust sample was sent to an independent lab for verification.
Well, the work has been, he discovered the stuff, and he did a lot of work on it, along with some of the other researchers involved in that team. Including a couple of them from BYU. However, I mean, it's appropriate. I mean, he's finding this and he's doing the work to try and find what there is about it. But there was somebody, I believe, in France, and there was somebody in New England who independently got their own samples and confirmed the results. So it's not just that this is one person doing this.
Well, also in regards to WTC-7, just in case anybody listening doesn't know, the official report for 9/11, the 9/11 Commission, doesn't even mention World Trade Center 7 in its entire report, which I thought was just, strange. They would leave out such a huge detail of that day, but...
Well, it's strange if you're going to have an honest report. It's not strange if they're doing an intentional cover-up. So what does that tell you? The signs of cover-up are the clearest things of anything in this whole, can't remember who's who with all this, but there was somebody who was involved with the military, I know. They were saying they knew that, I heard this on a radio interview, and it was like they were convinced that the whole thing was a con job the very first day. And they said, well, how did you know so quickly? And they said, well, they saw the buildings come down, they thought that was very unusual. Then as soon as they found passports on the streets of New York and also in Pennsylvania, that left no question in his mind this was a setup. And think about it. Just take that much evidence all by itself for evidence of complicity. If you found passports on the street, you did not find the passports on the street. They were clearly, obviously planted in both of those circumstances. In order to plant them, you had to have somebody who was motivated to cover this up. You had to have preparation. You had to figure out ahead of time who you're going to pin this on, to whose picture you're going to put in that passport. You had to manufacture these phony passports and put them in place, or else claim that they were found out where they were and so forth. There is so much evidence of foreknowledge and participation in simply that much of an event that we have complicity. And as soon as you have complicity, that somebody who knew what was going to happen and participated in it happening,
right,
everything unravels right there. So,
well, the way I see it too,
it doesn't take a physics analysis to get beyond what they call the LIHOP thing, where we just sort of innocently
let it
wandered
happen
into this, and it happened. We somehow knew it was going to happen and let it happen. We were complicit in it happening from the simplest evidence that you can find.
Well, all these different subjects concerning that day, like including demolitions, I find, okay, they're all important in their own respects, and they're all deserving to be known and be brought to the attention of everybody. You know, it also depends on who you're talking to on certain subjects to bring up. Like, I would think, you know, personally, if I'm talking to a structural engineer or somebody like that, of course I would bring up World Trade Center 7 and the towers. If I was talking to a military person, maybe I'd bring up, you know, the lack of air defense or something. You know, different people, there's different things that would start getting them to go scratch their head and go, maybe
That's
something's
true.
funny here.
And I have no problem with that, except when you take that to the next step and say that demolition didn't happen, or you try to brush aside the demolition stuff. We don't want to go there because we're not scientists. Let's focus on this other. And they're trying to downplay one as though it's just unreliable or something like that. The demolition thing is so absolutely reliable. And it's our strongest physical evidence. To try and let that go is a huge mistake. You need to affirm that regardless of what you want to emphasize with your particular audience. If you have an idea that this was basically, you discovered the hijackers were going to do their thing and you decided to let it happen, how do you work demolitions into that? The demolitions happened. Okay? The pre-planted explosives happened. And so, yes, it may not be the thing that you want to lead with a particular audience, but to try to construct a theory that doesn't have room for that is a mistake.
Well, I think a lot of times, too, people think, okay, if these buildings were destroyed, there must have been government complicity or something like that. You know, and there is, I got to say, like, there is a big play on patriotism in America. It's not so much, I always try to say this, people need to distinguish between the whole government. The government is an institution made up of people. There's criminals in the government with powerful positions who could have and seem to have, and I would say did, help make this happen. Yep.
You also have two other things here going. You have security agencies within the government. And you say, well, those are patriotic people, you know, like CIA and FBI and people who are involved in carrying out those kinds of operations. But the thing is, they have been doing this same, on a qualitative level, they've been doing the same kind of thing over and over again in the other parts of the world throughout the whole Cold War. We've destabilized governments, we've done all kinds of demolitions, and we've basically engineered supposed revolutions against democratic leaders. I mean, what we did in Guatemala, what we did in Indonesia, there's so many of these. What we did in Vietnam. I mean, look at what we've done with such a callous disregard for life. And this has gone on over and over again. I was involved with the sanctuary movement, which was dealing with Central American refugees in the 1980s. And the churches I was working with were involved in sheltering refugees from El Salvador and Guatemala. And we heard so many stories firsthand on what it's like to be on the receiving end of U.S. foreign policy. I mean, it was so gross. And, you know, you had death squad. One of the families we were working with, there was two families that they knew each other ahead of time, but in each case, the women of these two families had been swept up in mass arrests, never charged with anything. They were put in a women's prison in El Salvador. They were kept there for a couple of years. One of the women had her son born in prison. Okay, so here they come. And when Amnesty International is the one who actually got them released, they had a general amnesty, so all these women were released at one time. Within days, they started showing up dead because of death squads. And it was our government policy. We were supporting the people who were pulling off these death squads. It was because of that these people they took refuge in the Catholic Church. They got smuggled out of the country, and they eventually came here. And so we were working with these two families.